For centuries, Africa was a continent rich in culture, history, and diversity. But in the 15th century, European nations began to explore the continent, seeking new trade routes and resources. What followed was the most horrific and brutal practice in human history, the transatlantic slave trade, which was initiated by the Europeans. Slaves were packed into the holds of ships like sardines, with no room to move, no fresh air, and no food or water. Many died during the voyage, succumbing to disease, malnutrition, and despair. But the horrors did not end there. Narrator. Some slaves were thrown overboard to drown, either because they were sick and seen as expendable or as a form of punishment. As Olaudah Equiano, a former slave, wrote in the interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano, I saw a multitude of black people of every description chained together, every one of their countenances expressing dejection and sorrow. They were frequently taken out and thrown into the sea. Slaves who resisted were beaten, whipped, mutilated, or killed. Amputations were sometimes done without anesthesia, and wounds were often left untreated, resulting in infections and even death. Women were subjected to sexual exploitation, with many being *D by their masters or other male slaves. Narrator. Families were torn apart, children were separated from their parents, and those who were too weak or sick to work were sometimes prematurely killed and thrown overboard. African leaders who refused to provide slaves were sometimes murdered, along with their families. Note that it is a fraud if you were told Africans were also this. What will be their gain? The transatlantic slave trade was primarily initiated by the Europeans, particularly the Portuguese, who began to explore the West African coast and discovered the potential for capturing and selling African slaves. The demand for slave labor in the New World, particularly in the sugar plantations of Brazil and the Caribbean, drove the expansion of the trade, with other European nations such as Britain, France, Spain, and the Netherlands following Portugal's lead. The scars of slavery still haunt us to this day, and its effects can be seen in the systemic racism and inequality that persist in many parts of the world. We must acknowledge the pain and suffering of those who were enslaved and their descendants, and work towards creating a world where every human being is valued and respected.